My fiancé walked into our engagement party with his college ex beside him, introducing the ring on her hand, the one he told me was being resized. My fiancé told me my engagement ring needed to be resized. 10 days later, he walked into our own engagement party with his college girlfriend, and the ring was on her hand. Resized, it turned out, for her finger, not mine, and paid for out of the same account he swore had nothing left over for our wedding. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense, unless you understand how good he was at this. Corbin Reyes did not seem like a man capable of what he did. He remembered my coffee order down to the extra pump of vanilla. He called my mother on her birthday before I did. He was the kind of careful, attentive person that made my friends say, "You got the good one," at every single brunch for 3 years. That reputation is exactly what let him get away with it for as long as he did. We met at a wine bar called Cellar 6 on a Thursday in October, 3 years and 4 months before the party. I remember the date because it was the same night my restaurant deal for a client fell through. I'm an event planner, and losing that account felt catastrophic at the time. I was drinking a $9 glass of Malbec alone at the bar, decompressing, when Corbin sat 2 stools down and asked if the bartender always poured that heavy on a Thursday. We talked for 2 hours. He worked in commercial real estate, mid-level, closing deals on strip malls and office parks, the kind of job that pays well but sounds boring at parties. I liked that he didn't try to make it sound more impressive than it was. We moved in together 14 months after Cellar 6 into a 2-bedroom on Larchmont Avenue with a rent of $2,200 a month, split 60-40 in his favor because he made more. I remember the day we signed the lease, standing in the empty living room with our footsteps echoing, Corbin spinning me in a slow circle and saying, "This is the first place that's ever felt like it was actually mine to keep." My best friend Odette helped us paint the bedroom a color called Harbor Gray that weekend, and at one point, while Corbin was out getting more rollers, she leaned against the wall and said, only half joking, "You know you found the unicorn, right? Remembers your coffee order, calls his own mother back, don't screw it up." I told her I had no intention of screwing anything up. I meant it. I met his parents, Denise and Hal, 7 months into dating, at a backyard cookout at their house in a suburb called Wellers Point. Denise made a potato salad she was famous for in that family, and spent 20 minutes walking me through her recipe as if I were being handed something sacred. Hal, quieter, asked me thoughtful questions about my job, wanted to know what made an event actually come together versus just look nice on paper, and listened to my answer like it mattered to him. Driving home that night, Corbin reached over and took my hand off the gear shift and said, "They loved you. My mom doesn't do the recipe thing for just anybody." I remember feeling in that moment like I had been let into something solid and permanent. I think about that cookout often now, mostly because I still don't know how to reconcile the man who drove me home that night with the one who 4 years later would let his mother find out about his affair standing next to a dessert table. He proposed on a chartered boat on Lake Marbury, 11 months before the party I'm about to tell you about. It was a Saturday in April, 6:40 in the evening, the sun low enough that the water had gone the color of a bruise. He'd arranged for the boat captain, a man named Deshawn, to cut the engine at a specific point so the only sound was water against the hull. The ring was his grandmother's sapphire, reset into a new white gold band that had cost him, he told me proudly, $4,100 at a shop called Petrosian & Sons on Kessler Avenue. He'd had it sized to a 7, my size, based on a ring of mine he'd secretly borrowed and measured 2 months earlier. I said yes before he finished the sentence.
Sorry to interrupt. Real quick, before the story continues. If this story hit close to home, here's the thing. Most people don't figure this stuff out until years later, after it's already cost them something. I put together the manipulation playbook so you don't have to learn it the hard way. 49 patterns, real examples, and exactly what to do the moment you spot one. It's already helped hundreds of people see clearly what took me years to figure out. Links in the description. Okay, back to what happened.
Sean, watching from the wheel, started clapping, which made both of us laugh so hard I nearly dropped the ring into the lake. We set the engagement party for a Saturday in June, 10 weeks out. I planned it myself, because it's what I do for a living and because I wanted it to be perfect. 85 guests. The Ivy House, a rooftop venue downtown with a $4,800 deposit, non-refundable, which I paid from my own savings account because Corbin said his bonus hadn't cleared yet. Catering through a company called Larkspur Table, plated dinner, $62 a head. A 4-piece string quartet booked for 2 hours at $900. I picked out linen in a color called Dusted Rose and spent an evening arguing pleasantly with Corbin's mother, Denise, about whether the seating chart should separate his cousins from hers. Corbin's mother had opinions about almost everything to do with the party, but she deferred to me on the big decisions, which I appreciated more than I let on at the time. When I told her I wanted to do a first look photo session before the guests arrived, just the 2 of us on the rooftop with the skyline behind us, she teared up on the phone and said it sounded like something out of a magazine. I remember thinking at the time how strange it was that a woman I'd known for 3 years already felt like family, and how much I trusted the version of her son she'd raised. She sent me a photo the next day of a dress she'd worn to her own wedding, asking if I wanted to borrow the pearl earrings that went with it, and I said yes, and wore them. And they're still sitting in a small dish on my dresser, because I never gave them back and she's never once asked for them. I had no reason then to think any of it was built on something false. I remember one specific evening from that stretch, because it's the kind of memory that only becomes painful in hindsight. It was a Wednesday, 3 weeks into planning, and Corbin and I were sitting cross-legged on our living room floor with 112 place cards spread out between us, arguing cheerfully carefully about whether his Uncle Rick could be trusted near the open bar. He picked up a card with my handwriting on it, turned it over in his fingers, and said, "You're really good at this. Like, scary good." I told him it was because I loved doing it for people I actually cared about, that clients were one thing, but this was different. He kissed the top of my head and said, "I got so lucky." I believed him completely. It was, by every visible measure, the happiest 10 weeks of my life. I want to tell you about one more detail from that stretch, because it's the kind of thing that only becomes significant later. Corbin had started blocking out time on our shared Google Calendar labeled simply SOD strategy call, recurring every other Wednesday at 4 now in the afternoon. I asked him once, in passing, what SV stood for, assuming it was some real estate client's initials, a strip mall, or an office park with a boring corporate name. "Sylvan View," he said without missing a beat. "Retail redevelopment out by the highway. It's a whole thing." I nodded and let it go. I had no reason at that point to doubt him about anything. Then, 6 weeks before the party, on a Tuesday, Corbin told me the ring needed resizing. He said it had started slipping on my finger, which was true. I'd noticed it too. My hands run cold and thin in the mornings, and that Petrosians could get it done in 10 days. He took it off my hand himself at our kitchen counter at 7:15 in the evening, kissed my bare knuckle, and put the ring in a small velvet pouch that he tucked into his jacket pocket. I didn't think twice about it. Why would I have? The first thing I noticed, 3 days later, was small enough that I almost laughed at myself for noticing it. Corbin's phone, which he'd left face up on the arm of the couch for 3 straight years, started living face down. Not dramatically. He didn't announce a new privacy policy. It just happened, the way a habit changes without anyone naming it. I mentioned it once, joking, "Since when do you hide your phone from me?" And he said something about a coworker sending him unprofessional memes he didn't want popping up during dinner. I let it go. People are allowed a little privacy. I told myself that at least 4 times that week, which in retrospect was 3 times too many. The second thing was a Venmo notification. We shared a joint account for bills, but Corbin kept a separate personal account too, and normally I never saw a thing from it. But his phone buzzed on the counter while he was in the shower, and the notification banner sat there long enough for me to read it without meaning to. A charge to a name I didn't recognize, Sabine V, for $340. Memo line, "Half for the room, ha." I stood in our kitchen holding a spatula, reading that sentence 4 times. Half for the room, ha. I heard the shower shut off down the hall and set his phone back exactly where it had been, screen still dark, and by the time he came out in a towel asking what was for dinner, my hands had stopped shaking enough that I could answer him normally. I want to be honest about what I did next, because it matters for what came later. I didn't confront him. I told myself there were 100 explanations. A work retreat split with a colleague, a shared Airbnb for a bachelor party he hadn't mentioned yet. I was, at that point, 11 weeks into planning the happiest day of my life, and some animal part of my brain understood that pulling one thread might unravel the whole thing, so I chose, for 6 more days, not to pull it. 2 nights after the Venmo notification, I called Odette from my car in the parking garage of my office, sitting in the dark with the engine off, and told her about the charge. She was quiet for a second and then said carefully, "Okay, that's probably nothing, but who's Sabine?" I told her I didn't know. She said, "Ask him. Just ask him straight out, rip a band-aid off." I told her I would. I didn't. Instead, I sat in that garage for 40 minutes, past the point where the automatic lights had clicked off twice, just staring at my own hands on the steering wheel, before I finally drove home and made dinner like nothing had happened. I broke on a Sunday night, 8 days after the ring came off my finger. Corbin was asleep next to me, and I lay awake doing the thing you're not supposed to do, which is scroll backward through a shared history looking for the moment things changed. We'd had our devices linked to the same iCloud family photo stream since our first year together, a setting neither of us had ever bothered to undo. At 1:50 in the morning, half out of guilt and half out of something that felt like self-preservation, I opened the shared stream and searched by date instead of by album. 4 months back in February, a photo surfaced that I had never seen before, backed up automatically from Corbin's phone. A selfie of him and a woman at a restaurant table, 2 glasses of red wine, a plate of what looked like burrata between them. The caption line, auto-generated from his camera roll, read, "Windrose, 8:12 p.m. I didn't recognize the restaurant. I didn't recognize the woman, but I recognized, with a cold drop in my stomach, the necklace she was wearing, a thin gold chain with a small compass charm, because it was the exact necklace in 3 separate photos from Corbin's own Instagram archive, tagged years earlier, of a woman he dated in college. Her name, when I searched it, was Sabine Voss. I didn't sleep that night. At 3:40 in the morning, I got up, went to the kitchen, and sat at the counter with a glass of water I didn't drink, staring at the photo on my phone screen, until the compass necklace stopped looking like a coincidence and started looking like evidence. Corbin found me there at 6:15 when his alarm went off and asked, half asleep, why I was already dressed. I told him I couldn't sleep and had an early call with a client. It was the first real lie I'd ever told him, and it came out of me easier than I expected. I didn't sleep well for the rest of that week. Instead, I did the one thing my job had trained me to do better than almost anyone I know. I built a file. I want to walk you through what that file looked like 6 weeks later, because every piece of it mattered, and because I think it's the only reason anyone believed me when it counted. The first entry was the Venmo screenshot, timestamped 6:52 in the evening on a Thursday, a half for the room ha charge to Sabine Vi. I cross-referenced it 2 days later against our joint checking account and found a debit, same day, to a hotel 40 minutes outside the city called the Red Lake Inn, $119, which was exactly double the Venmo charge minus a service fee, $238 for a room room, split evenly. I called the Red Lake Inn on a Sunday afternoon while Corbin was out running errands, sitting on the edge of our bed with a legal pad in front of me, and used a pretext I'd rehearsed twice in the bathroom mirror, that I'd stayed there recently and thought I'd left an umbrella behind. The woman who answered had a bored, unhurried voice and asked for the name on the reservation to check the room. Corbin Reyes, I said, and my own voice came out steadier than I felt. There was a pause, the keyboard clicking, and then she said, "Yep, got that one. Checked out at 11:04 the next morning. No umbrella logged in, lost and found. Sorry, hun." I thanked her and hung up and sat on the bed for a long time afterward. The legal pad blank, except for the words 11:04 a.m. checkout, confirmed, written in handwriting I barely recognized as my own. The second entry was the February photo from Windrose, along with 3 more I found once I knew what I was looking for. April 3rd, a coffee shop, timestamp 10:14 a.m. April 22nd, what looked like a gallery opening, timestamp 7:40 p.m. Sabine standing close enough that his hand was visible resting on the small of her back. And May 9th, a parking garage, blurry, clearly taken by accident when his phone had been in his pocket, but unmistakably her, laughing at something out of frame. I went back to the gallery photo 3 separate times over the following week, zooming in on details I probably shouldn't have cared about. The small paper wristband on her arm, a piece of art visible behind them that I later identified, out of some obsessive need to fill in the full picture, as a show at a place called the Ferris Gallery on Colby Street. I looked up the show's dates online. It had run for exactly 1 week, April 18th through the 25th. Corbin had told me that same week that he was in Denver for a client site visit. I still have the boarding pass confirmation email he forwarded me at the time, dated April 19th, departure 6:05 a.m. I don't know, to this day, whether the Denver trip was real and he simply flew back early, or whether it never happened at all. I never asked him. By the time I had the chance to, I no longer wanted an answer I couldn't verify myself. The third entry, and the one that actually broke something loose in my chest, came from a work friend of mine named Priya, who moonlights doing jewelry appraisals and knew the staff at Petrosian & Sons personally. I met her for coffee on a Tuesday and asked her, as casually as I could manage, stirring sugar into a cup I never drank, to check on a resizing order under Corbin's name. She raised an eyebrow but didn't push, just said, "Give me a couple days." In the 2 days I waited to hear back from her, I kept myself busy with party logistics, confirming the final headcount with Larkspur Table, walking through the floor plan with Priscilla at the Ivy House, sending a follow-up email to the string quartet about their arrival time, anything to keep my hands occupied and my mind from circling back to that Venmo notification and what it might mean. It didn't work particularly well. She called me back 2 days later, on a Thursday evening, and I picked up sitting in my parked car outside a grocery store. Groceries still in the cart 3 feet away. "So this is weird," she said. "There's no Reyes order at Petrosian's. Not this month, not this year. I had my contact check both." My stomach dropped before she even finished the sentence. But okay, don't read into this too much. I asked a friend at a different shop as a long shot, place called Lindqvist, 6 blocks over. "And there's an order there. Placed the same week you said, resizing a white gold band down to a 6.5. I asked her, my voice flat in a way that scared me a little, what size that was. "Smaller than yours," she said gently. "You're a 7, right? A 6.5 is maybe a 1/4 inch smaller circumference, small hands." I asked if there was any chance it was a mistake, a fluke, maybe he'd guessed wrong on a form somewhere. Priya was quiet for a second before she said, "Maren, you don't accidentally order a resized 6 blocks from the shop you told your fiancé you were using." I sat in that parking lot for 11 minutes after we hung up, groceries slowly warming in the July heat before I could make myself drive home. The fourth entry, and the one I almost didn't find, came from an old laptop of Corbin's that had been sitting in our hall closet since he'd upgraded phones 2 years earlier, and it had synced messages one last time before he switched services. I only opened it because I was looking for a tax document. A Saturday afternoon while Corbin was at his brother's for a golf outing. The apartment quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. The laptop took almost 4 minutes to boot up, the fan whining the whole time, and I remember sitting there thinking I should just close it and wait for him to find the document himself. Instead, I found a message thread with Sabine going back 4 months to February 11th, 3 days before that Windrose photo. I scrolled slowly, my thumb shaking slightly on the trackpad, reading the whole arc of it. The first message from him read, "Can't believe we're doing this again. Feels like no time passed." Hers, a few lines down. I told myself I wasn't going to text you back, but here we are. Further down, dated May 30th, 11 days before our engagement party. A message from Corbin that I read 6 times before I could make myself close the laptop. "M doesn't have to know yet. Let the party do the explaining. Easier for everyone that way." Her reply, sent 4 minutes later, was 3 words long. "You're impossible." Okay. I closed the laptop, unplugged it, and put it back exactly where it had been on the closet shelf, angled the same way. The charging cable coiled the same loose figure 8 it had been in before. Then I sat on the hallway floor with my back against the closet door for close to an hour, not crying, just breathing, running the math on how long "we're doing this again" had actually been going on. There was a 5th thread I pulled on, almost by accident, at a mutual friend's birthday dinner 2 weeks before the party. A woman named Fern, who'd gone to college with both Corbin and Sabine, mentioned offhand that she'd seen the 2 of them at a coffee shop downtown a few weeks earlier, and had assumed, since I wasn't there, that it was just old friends catching up. "She looked really happy," Fern said, twirling pasta onto her fork, not realizing what she was handing me. "I always thought it was kind of sad they broke up, honestly. They were cute together back in the day." I asked, as evenly as I could manage, when exactly she'd seen them. April, I think. Maybe early May. I did the math later that night. It lined up almost exactly with the gallery opening photo, the one from April 22nd. I added Fern's name to a mental list of people I might need as witnesses later, though I never ended up calling on her directly. I don't think she ever found out how much that one offhand comment mattered. Somewhere in that hour, something clicked into place that had been sitting unresolved in the back of my mind for weeks. SV, strategy call. Not Sylvan View, Sabine Voss. I pulled up our shared calendar on my phone right there on the hallway floor and counted. 11 of those recurring blocks since February, every other Wednesday, 4 in the afternoon, 2 hours before he usually got home. I didn't confront him about it. I added a 5th page to the folder instead. A screenshot of the calendar, 11 entries highlighted in yellow, with a note in the margin in my own handwriting, not Sylvan View. There was one close call that week that still makes my stomach drop to think about. I was going through the pockets of his gym bag, looking for a receipt I half remembered seeing tucked into a side pocket weeks earlier, kneeling on our bedroom floor with the bag's contents spread around me, a water bottle, a balled-up gray t-shirt, a single sneaker. When I heard his key turn in the front door, 20 minutes earlier than his usual Tuesday schedule, my heart went up into my throat. I shoved everything back into the bag, in roughly the order I'd found it. Zipper half undone because my hands wouldn't cooperate fast enough, kicked it back against the closet wall, and was standing at the kitchen sink pretending to wash a coffee mug that was already clean by the time he walked into the kitchen. "You okay?" he asked, dropping his keys into the bowl by the door, studying me for a second longer than felt comfortable. "Fine," I said, not turning around fully. "Long day. Client canceled a contract." He accepted that instantly, the way he accepted almost everything I told him that summer, and came over to kiss the side of my head before heading to the shower. He believed me. He always believed me, right up until the night he had every reason not to. Let the party do the explaining. I sat with that sentence for a long time. He wasn't just cheating. He had a plan, and the plan involved 85 of our closest friends and family finding out what he'd done to me at the exact moment I was supposed to be celebrating him. There was one night, about 4 weeks before the party, when I almost said something. Corbin came home late from what he said was a client dinner, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine, cologne of his own barely masking it, and I stood in the kitchen with the words already forming. I know about Sabine, I know about the Red Lake Inn, I know the ring is a 6.5, and instead I heard myself ask if he wanted leftover pasta. He said yes. We ate at the counter and talked about seating charts, whether his Uncle Rick should sit near the bar or far from it, and at one point he reached over and squeezed my hand and said, "Thank you for doing all of this. I don't tell you enough how much it means to me." I remember smiling at him and thinking, with a kind of detached horror, that I could see the exact muscles in his face move to produce that smile, and that I no longer had any idea if it was real. I have thought about that night more than almost any other moment of my life, wondering what would have changed if I'd said it then, in private, instead of what I eventually chose to do. I don't have an answer. I only know that by the time I stopped being afraid of the confrontation, I wanted it to happen on my terms, not his, and definitely not quietly. About 10 days before the party, unable to sleep again, I finally told Odette the full version: the hotel, the photos, the resizing order, the message thread. She was quiet on the phone for a long moment and then said, "Marin, you have to cancel the party." I told her I wasn't going to. She asked why, and I said, honestly, that some part of me wanted him to walk into that room thinking he'd gotten away with it. She didn't argue with me after that. She just said, "Okay, then I'm bringing my own camera." 2 weeks before the party, I did something I'm not entirely proud of. I called Denise, Corbin's mother, and asked her gently whether she remembered Sabine Voss from college. There was a pause on the line long enough that I knew the answer before she said a word. "They dated for 2 years, she finally told me, her voice careful, like she was picking her way across ice. "Ended badly, I think, right before he met you. Why are you asking?" I told her I'd just heard the name somewhere and was curious, that a mutual friend had mentioned it. There was another pause, and then she said, almost to herself, "That's strange. He hasn't mentioned her in years." I told her I had to go, that I had a client call, and hung up before she could ask anything else. I didn't tell her the rest. I wanted her at that party. I wanted her to see it happen in real time, the same way I was about to. In the final week before the party, I printed the folder 3 separate times because I kept second-guessing the order of the pages and reprinting it until it felt right. Evidence you could hand to a stranger and have them understand the whole story in under 2 minutes. I bought a plain manila folder from a drugstore, the kind with no branding on it, and slid the 9 pages inside and put it in the bottom of a tote bag I planned to carry into the venue myself instead of checking with the coat staff. The night before the party, I sat at our kitchen counter with that folder open in front of me one last time, Corbin asleep down the hall, and I genuinely didn't know what I was going to do the next day. Part of me wanted to cancel everything, call all 85 guests myself, spare us both the spectacle. Another part of me, the part that had spent 6 weeks quietly documenting every lie, wanted the 85 guests to be exactly the point. I fell asleep on the couch that night instead of our bed, telling him I didn't want to wrinkle my dress hanging in the closet, which wasn't remotely true, but which he accepted without a second thought, the same way he accepted everything else. I did not, at any point that week, fully decide what I was going to do with the folder. I only knew I wasn't walking into that rooftop without it. The morning of the party, a Saturday in June, I woke up at 6 there with that manila folder sitting in my nightstand drawer, 9 pages, the Venmo screenshot, the 4 photos, Priya's written confirmation of the Lindqvist order, and a single printed screenshot of that message. Let the party do the explaining. Corbin was already up, humming something in the shower, and when he came out, he kissed my forehead and said, "Big day." I told him it was. It was the last completely honest sentence I said to him. The Ivy House looked exactly the way I'd designed it to look, which felt strange, like watching someone else's dream come true. 85 guests in dusted rose linen. Votive candles down the center of each of the 11 round tables, 42 of them in total, because I'd counted twice while setting them out that morning. The string quartet tuning up at 6:30, running scales under the string lights the coordinator's team had hung along the railing an hour earlier. A 3-tier cake from a bakery called Farrow and Vine that had cost $600 and that I'd tasted 4 separate times to get right, sitting on its own small table with a hand-lettered sign that read, "Marin and Corbin" in gold script I'd chosen myself. Guests started arriving at 6:45. My mother came early and cried a little, touching the flowers, a mix of white ranunculus and dusted rose garden roses that had cost $900 from a florist named Blythe. Corbin's father, a quiet man named Hal, shook my hand and said he was proud to be gaining a daughter, and slipped me a card he asked me not to open until later, which I still have, unopened, in a drawer. Odette arrived at 6:50 in a dark green dress, hugged me tight, and murmured into my ear, "I've got the camera charged to 100%, just so you know." I smiled at every single guest who came through those doors and felt, underneath it, a strange calm, the calm of someone who has already done the hardest part and is only waiting for the last piece to land. Corbin was supposed to arrive at 7:09. He arrived at 7:24. I know the exact time because I was standing near the entrance checking my phone every few minutes, and I watched the elevator doors open at exactly 7:24 and 51 seconds, according to the photo timestamp I checked later on a guest's camera roll. He walked out first, in a navy suit I'd picked out with him at a store on Delridge, and then Sabine Voss stepped out behind him, in a green dress, laughing at something, her hand resting lightly on his arm the way you'd expect a friend's hand to rest, except that on the 4th finger of that hand, catching the string lights the venue coordinator had strung along the railing, was a white gold band with a sapphire stone, my ring, the one that had gone in for resizing 38 days earlier. The room didn't go silent all at once. It happened in patches. First the people closest to the elevator, then a wave outward, conversations dying mid-sentence, someone's fork audibly hitting a plate. My mother's hand found my arm. Denise, standing near the bar, went very still, and I watched her eyes go straight to that ring, the same way mine had. Odette, who'd been leaning against the railing near the quartet, quietly lifted her phone and started recording, exactly like she'd promised. Corbin saw me and smiled, the same easy smile he'd used on me at Cellar 6 3 years earlier, and started walking over like nothing at all was wrong, Sabine trailing half a step behind him. "Hey," he said. "Sorry we're late. Traffic on the bridge was insane." "Whose ring is that?" I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The quartet had stopped playing. He glanced down at Sabine's hand like he was surprised to find it attached to her arm. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like my engagement ring is on her hand," I said. "Explain to me what it actually looks like." Sabine spoke up here, which I hadn't expected. "We're just here as friends," she said, her voice pitched too bright too fast. "Corbin invited me because we've known each other forever. He said it would be fine. I didn't want to make a whole thing. You're wearing my ring," I said again, and this time my voice did shake, just slightly. "Friends don't wear each other's engagement rings, Sabine." Someone near the bar, one of Corbin's college friends I only half recognized, said quietly but not quietly enough, "Oh my God." A guest 2 feet away murmured to another that maybe they should go check on the coats. Nobody moved. Corbin's smile finally slipped. "Okay, look, can we talk about this privately?" "No," I said. "We can talk about it right here, since you decided this was where you wanted to have the conversation." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the folded pages I'd been carrying all night, the printed screenshot on top. "Since you already told her the party would do the explaining for you." I watched something drain out of his face when he saw the paper. "Where did you get that?" "Your old laptop. February 11th. Can't believe we're doing this again. May 30th. Doesn't have to know yet. Let the party do the explaining." Should I keep reading? "There's the Red Lake Inn. There's the Venmo charge for the room. $340. Half for you, half for her. There's Lindqvist Jewelers. Ring resized to a 6.5 on May 22nd, which is not my size in case anyone here is wondering." For a second, nobody in that room moved. Corbin's father, Hal, standing near the cake table, set down his drink very deliberately, the glass making a small, final-sounding click against the surface. Then Corbin did the thing I'd been waiting 6 weeks to see him do. Without ever admitting to myself I was waiting for it, he started backpedaling. "It's okay. It's not what you're making it sound like. We reconnected a few months ago. It wasn't supposed to become anything. I was going to tell you after the party. I didn't want to ruin tonight." "You didn't want to ruin tonight," I repeated. "You had her resize the ring 3 weeks before tonight." "You've been distant for weeks," he said, and his voice sharpened, the blame arriving right on schedule. "Buried in work stuff for this party, honestly, and I felt like I didn't even know you anymore. And Sabine was she was easy to talk to. That's all this was." "I paid the deposit on this venue myself," I said. $4,800, non-refundable, because you said your bonus hadn't cleared." "Did it clear, Corbin? Or did it go to a hotel room 40 minutes outside the city?" That was the moment he broke. Not dramatically. He didn't cry, he didn't fall to his knees, but something in his posture just gave out, his shoulders dropping. And he said, quiet enough that only the people closest to us really heard it. He tried one more time to soften it, glancing around at the guests still watching. "I was going to tell you, I swear, the timing never felt right. And then the party was right there, and I panicked. And Sabine said we should just come, and I thought maybe if you saw it was casual, you'd understand it wasn't as serious as it." "You had her ring resized to fit her her hand, I said. There's nothing casual about that. I didn't know how to end it with you without hurting everyone. You just did, I said, in front of 85 people. For a moment, Corbin just stood there, his jaw working, looking around the room as if searching for someone who might rescue him from it, and finding no one. His best man, a college friend named Trent, who I'd known for exactly the length of our engagement, took a step backward toward the bar, physically distancing himself, as if proximity to Corbin might be contagious. Somewhere behind me, I heard Hal, Corbin's father, say quietly to no one, "I don't understand how you do something like this." It wasn't a question anyone was meant to answer. Denise crossed the room at that point and stood between us, facing her son, and said something I will never forget. "Corbin Michael Reyes, give her back that ring right now." Her voice carried further than I think she meant it to, and it was the first time all night the whole room had gone completely, totally silent. 42 candles flickering, and not one single person speaking. Sabine, to her credit, or maybe just to save herself further humiliation, was already tugging it off her finger. Her hands were shaking badly enough that it took her 3 tries to get it over her knuckle. "I didn't know," she said, to no one in particular, her voice thin. "He told me you two had basically ended things months ago. He said you were just staying together for the deposits." A few guests near us made small, disbelieving sounds. I looked at her and said evenly, "The deposit on this venue is in my name. I paid it out of my own savings 6 weeks ago, the same week he had this ring resized for you." She didn't have an answer for that. She set the ring on the small dessert table next to the cake, not in anyone's hand, like she couldn't bear to touch it a second longer, gathered her small clutch, and left the venue 11 minutes later, alone, in an Uber. According to the valet stand I asked about afterward out of some morbid curiosity I still can't fully explain, I picked the ring up off the dessert table myself a few minutes later, once the worst of it had settled into a low, awful murmur across the room. It felt strange in my palm, lighter than I remembered, though I knew that was impossible. A ring doesn't lose weight. I put it in my clutch instead of back on my hand. I haven't worn it since. Corbin lingered near the bar after that, not quite leaving, not quite staying, talking in low tones to Trent, who kept his arms crossed the whole time and offered short-clipped answers. A few of my own friends formed a loose circle around me without anyone organizing it, the way people do instinctively when someone needs a wall between them and the rest of a room. My cousin Beatrice, who'd flown in from out of state for the weekend, kept one hand on my back the entire time, occasionally squeezing my shoulder, not saying anything, which was exactly the right amount of comfort for that particular moment. Corbin stayed. He tried for about 20 more minutes to talk to small clusters of stunned guests, to explain, to apologize, and I watched most of them simply turn their backs on him, drinks in hand, the quartet still silent in the corner. His college friend from the bar left without saying goodbye to anyone. I didn't cry until I got into the venue coordinator's back office, 20 minutes later, where my mother found me sitting on an overturned crate of folding chairs and just held on to me while I shook. Priscilla, the venue coordinator, came in at one point with a glass of water I didn't ask for and set it on the desk beside me. "For what it's worth," she said, "I've worked probably 200 events in this room. I have never seen anyone handle something like that with that much composure." I laughed, a strange wet sound, and told her composure was just what shock looked like from the outside. She said maybe. She left the water anyway. I ended things with him formally 3 days later, over text, because I couldn't stand to be in the same room as him again. He tried calling 7 times that first night and left one voicemail I listened to exactly once, in which his voice cracked on the words, "I never meant for it to go this far." I didn't answer any of the calls. I saved the voicemail out of the same instinct that had made me save everything else, and then I never listened to it again. 8 months have passed since that Saturday at the Ivy House. I kept the venue relationship, oddly enough. Priscilla referred me to 4 new clients within 2 months, saying, half joking, that anyone who could stay that composed while their fiancé's affair unraveled in real time deserved the business. By August, I'd left the firm I'd worked for and opened my own, a small event planning company with an office above a bakery on Colby Street, 3 blocks from that gallery I'd once zoomed in on so obsessively, close enough that I walk past its windows most mornings on my way in and no longer feel much of anything when I do. I named it Larchmont & Co., after the street where we'd painted a bedroom Harbor Gray and where I still, for now, pay rent alone. It now has 3 employees and a client waitlist that runs through next spring, and Odette works there part-time doing our social media, including, occasionally, a slightly redacted version of the story you're hearing right now, which she swears is our best performing content by a wide margin. 4 months after the party, I ran into Denise at a grocery store on the north side of town, somewhere neither of us had any real reason to be, both of us reaching for the same shelf of canned tomatoes. We stood there for a second, carts between us, before she said, "I think about that night more than I'd like to admit." I told her I did too. She said Corbin had moved to a different city that spring, taken a transfer with his firm, and that she wasn't sure if it was for the job or just to get some distance from what everyone in his old circle now knew about him. I told her I hoped he was doing okay, which surprised me as much as it seemed to surprise her, because I meant it more than I expected to. We didn't hug. She squeezed my hand once over the cart handle and said, "You did the right thing, doing it the way you did it." I know that couldn't have been easy. I told her it wasn't. It was, I think, the last real conversation either of us has had. I still have that sapphire ring. It sits in a drawer in my new apartment, in the same small velvet pouch Corbin used to carry it away from me 38 days before everything ended. I haven't decided what to do with it. Some mornings I think about selling it and putting the money toward the office lease. Other mornings I think about keeping it exactly where it is, as a reminder that I built a file good enough to hold up in a room full of people, and that when it mattered, I didn't flinch. I think often about the difference between the man who drove me home from that first cookout at Weller's Point, hand over mine on the gear shift, and the one who stood in front of 85 people insisting it wasn't what it looked like. I don't think he became a different person somewhere along the way. I think, more uncomfortably, that both of those men were real, and that most people are capable of holding two completely contradictory versions of themselves at once, right up until something forces the two of them into the same room. For me, that room happened to be a rooftop with dusted rose linen and a $600 cake. Odette's video from that night still exists on a hard drive in my desk drawer, 41 minutes long, starting from the moment the elevator doors opened. I've watched it exactly once, the week after it happened, sitting alone in my childhood bedroom at my mother's house with headphones in so no one would hear it playing. I haven't watched it since, and I don't think I need to. I remember every second of it perfectly without the footage's help, the way the light caught the ring, the exact 11 minutes it took Sabine to leave, the sound of Denise's voice cutting through a room full of people who loved her son and didn't recognize him in that moment at all. Some nights I still catch myself running the numbers, the way I used to when I was building that folder. The $4,800, the $238 for the hotel room, the $600 for a cake nobody finished eating. It adds up to a specific figure if you want it. $5,738, roughly, spent on a celebration for a relationship that had already quietly ended in a hotel room 40 minutes outside the city. I don't do the math to torture myself anymore. I do it because it reminds me, oddly, of how thorough I was, and how that thoroughness is the exact skill that built the business I run now. The same instinct for tracking every detail, every timestamp, every dollar figure that used to go into other people's weddings and now goes into figuring out exactly what happened to my own life during those 6 weeks, right down to the day. The one thing I never resolved and probably never will is what happened between Corbin and Sabine after that night. Denise mentioned once, in a text I didn't ask for, that they weren't speaking anymore. I don't know if that's true. I've decided I don't need to know. I don't know exactly what I'll do with that ring eventually, or whether I'll ever tell this whole story to anyone else the way I've just told it to you. What I do know is that I walked into that party with a folder I hoped I'd never have to open, and I walked out of it having learned in the space of about 11 minutes that I was capable of standing perfectly still in front of 85 people while the life I thought I was building came apart and still be the one left holding all the paperwork. I keep the folder itself, the original 9 pages, in a fireproof box in my closet now. Not because I ever expect to need it again, but because getting rid of it feels like pretending it never happened, and I'd rather remember it exactly as it was. If you made it this far, thanks for sitting through the whole thing with me. Full story's linked below if you want to hear it start to finish.